Serious, desert dwellers, what's the strangest/scariest thing you've seen out in the sands? Mom, my grandpa, and I were driving through a lonely stretch of West Texas just as the sun was going down. The light was fading, and everything had that eerie, in-between glow. My mom suddenly slowed the car, squinting at the road ahead. It looked like it was shifting, almost alive. At the same time, there was this constant crunching sound under the tires. She asked my grandpa what was going on. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't want to know." Of course, that only made her more determined. She insisted he tell her. Instead, he reached over and flipped on the high beams. The road lit up, and it wasn't moving. It was covered. Thousands upon thousands of tarantulas, crawling in every direction. It wasn't the road that was alive. It was a full-blown migration. This isn't usually the kind of thing you'd call scary, but in that moment it absolutely terrified me and my friends. We were out camping, setting up as it got dark. The woods had gone quiet, and we were just finishing up when one of my friends started messing with his flashlight, trying to get it to work. Out of nowhere, he joked, "Wouldn't it be insane if there was a donkey just standing in our camp when I turned this on?" A second later, the flashlight flicked to life. And there it was. Somehow, a donkey had silently wandered right into the middle of us, like it had just appeared out of nowhere, standing between all four of us without making a single sound. Before any of us could even react, it let out this loud, sudden bray. We all completely lost it. I used to work as a wildlife biologist for the USFS, so I've spent a lot of time in the desert and come across just about everything that lives out there. Most of it never really rattled me, until one day. My partner and I were out doing invasive grass surveys when we noticed something strange moving in the distance. At first it looked like a low, dark cloud drifting just above the ground. Then we heard it, a deep, rising roar, like a prop plane coming straight at us. It was a swarm of killer bees relocating their hive. The entire mass moved as one, a dense, shifting cloud surrounding the queen in flight. As it passed over us, the sound was overwhelming, and the air itself seemed to vibrate. I felt a sudden rush of heat through my body and just froze. Completely. In all my time in the wild, I've never been that scared. Because I knew, if they decided we were a threat, allergic or not, that swarm could have killed both of us without much effort. It might not sound that scary on paper, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. I was camping out in the desert when someone in the campground made a really bad mistake, left a big cooler full of beer unlocked. During the night, a group of javelinas wandered in and helped themselves. Now, wild pigs aren't exactly friendly to begin with. Drunk, they're a whole different level. Within minutes, the campground turned into chaos. The javelinas were tearing through everything: coolers, bags, tents, anything they could get their snouts on. They were squealing non-stop, this high-pitched, almost human sound that echoed in the dark like something out of a nightmare. Stuff was getting knocked over, ripped apart, scattered everywhere, and yeah, they were making a mess of absolutely everything. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. Right in the middle of the campground, the whole group just dropped, one by one, into a pile and passed out cold. The silence afterward was almost as unsettling as the chaos. All of it couldn't have lasted more than 10 minutes, but it felt a lot longer. I stepped away from the campsite for a quick walk, just far enough into the dark to take a piss in peace. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence where every little sound feels amplified. As I rounded a corner, I looked up and froze. There, just beyond the edge of the light, was a mountain lion. Perfectly still, watching. Its eyes caught what little light there was, glowing faintly from the darkness. No sound, no movement, just that steady, unblinking stare. I suddenly felt very, very exposed. I live out in the Sonoran Desert. Don't know if that counts, but this definitely stuck with me. A few years back, there were rumors that some Mexican gray wolves had somehow made their way into our area. At the time, I was about 7. One day, I looked out the back window and locked eyes with something I'd never seen before. It was a wolf. Huge. Way bigger than any coyote I was used to seeing. For a second, I just stood there, staring. It stared right back. Then I noticed there were more, 3 in total, moving through our yard like they owned it. Thankfully, all of our pets, who were usually outside, were inside that day. They lingered for a bit, quietly checking everything out, and then just left. After that, people around the area kept reporting strange sightings. The story going around was that those wolves had taken over the local coyote packs and were leading them, making them bolder than anyone had ever seen before. From far away, or especially from above, it looks almost inviting. Like a shimmering oasis in the middle of the desert. Blue, calm, peaceful. The kind of place you'd expect cool water and a quiet shoreline. But the closer you get, the more wrong it feels. It's landlocked, with no river flowing out, so year after year the salts and minerals just build up, concentrating everything. When you reach the shore, there is a beach, but it's not quite right. It's made of sand mixed with layers of crushed, ancient shells that crunch under your feet. And the water, that blue you saw from a distance, it isn't really there. It's just the sky reflecting back at you. Up close, the water itself is dark, almost black, thick-looking, like something you shouldn't touch. Then the smell hits. Rotten fish. Sulfur. Something spoiled and lingering in the air. Dead fish are scattered everywhere along the shore, and clouds of flies hang over everything. You don't even want to get close, let alone go in. But if you did, you wouldn't sink. The salt is so concentrated you'd just float on the surface. It looks like an oasis. Until you're standing in it. Once, on a remote dirt road out near Joshua Tree, I spotted a rattlesnake lying in the middle of the road and pulled over to take a closer look. It was about 3 or 4 feet long, dead for maybe a week, still intact enough to tell what had happened. It had clearly been run over, its body twisted unnaturally. But what stuck with me was its head, its neck bent sharply, jaws locked into its own body, like it had struck itself in its final moments. A few months later, I was out in Butte Valley, not long after the Death Valley Germans had gone missing, retracing some of the places they'd been. What made it unsettling was how close they'd come to safety without realizing it. There were 2 well-stocked cabins less than an hour's walk from where they passed, places they could have survived in for months. In the opposite direction, a sandy wash gradually leads back to a road, with the distant lights of Shoshone visible at night. Instead, they chose a brutal route over a harsh mountain range, expecting to find a guarded military base they'd seen on a map. In reality, it was just a remote bombing range. No guards, no help, nothing. Out there, the isolation feels absolute, and at night, it gets heavy. Not far from there was the cabin where Charles Manson was finally captured. The place felt smaller than you'd expect, almost underwhelming. The cabinet he'd hidden in was tiny, barely bigger than a laundry hamper. It reminded me of those photos of kids somehow getting stuck inside claw machines. When I came back later, someone had ripped that cabinet out entirely, leaving holes and splintered plaster behind. Not long after that, the whole cabin burned down. For a place with that kind of history, the ending felt strangely anticlimactic. I've also explored my share of old mine shafts. Fascinating, but dangerous. One in the Calico Mountains, an old silver and borax mine, had massive wooden timbers, tree trunks 2 or 3 feet thick, holding up the ceiling where or had been removed. Some had already begun to fail, crushed and splintered under the weight above. There were a few unstable, 20-foot ladders leading down to a lower level with old rails and a low ceiling barely 5 feet high. Every step down there felt like a gamble. But one of the strangest encounters didn't involve nature at all. I was taking my young teenage nephews out to a remote desert canyon for a weekend of riding and exploring when we saw a woman walking alone down the dirt road, almost a mile from the canyon entrance. She didn't seem injured, just out of place. Like she'd wandered off from somewhere she didn't belong anymore. There was no room to pass, so I slowed and stopped a short distance away. She kept walking straight toward us at the same steady pace, until she reached the front of the motorhome and just stopped. She stared at me through the windshield, her expression blank but intense. A minute passed, maybe longer. Then something shifted in her face, like she'd made a decision. She started moving around toward the passenger side. The second she cleared the front of the vehicle, I hit the gas and got out of there before she could reach the doors. Out in a place that empty, that far from anything, it was the last kind of encounter you'd ever expect, and somehow, that made it worse. I still call him the Mirage Man. I wasn't even supposed to be there. We just broke down somewhere in the California desert. No smartphones, no signal, no easy way out. My friend wanted to start walking right away. I told him it was a terrible idea. But he didn't want to sit and wait, and I didn't want to be stranded alone without water, so we set off. We walked along the empty road, the heat pressing down on us, checking behind us every so often in case a car came by. After maybe an hour, we noticed something. A figure in the distance. At first, it didn't make sense. Just a person, far behind us, walking. My friend asked if we should turn around. I remember thinking how strange it was. We were in the middle of nowhere, in the desert, in the middle of the day. Why would anyone else be out there on foot? He suggested maybe someone had hit his car and was walking after us. But that didn't add up. We'd been gone for an hour. For someone to just appear and already be that close, it felt wrong. We kept going. And the figure kept coming. Not fast. Not running. Just steadily closing the distance. Every time we looked back, he was closer than before. Not by much, but enough to notice. Enough to make your stomach tighten. We picked up our pace as best we could in the heat, trying not to panic. Eventually, we spotted a truck stop off the road and pushed ourselves into a near jog to reach it. We got water from the vending machines and sat down, trying to act normal, but we kept watching. The man was still there. Only now, he wasn't getting any closer. He just stood at the same distance, like he'd stopped advancing the moment we reached the truck stop. My friend flagged down a driver after calling his motor club, and we kept our eyes locked on that figure the whole time. The driver said he didn't see anyone out there. As we drove back toward the car, something even stranger happened. The closer we got, the farther away the man seemed. And then he was gone. Just gone. We never saw him again. To this day, my friend swears it wasn't a person at all, that it was death itself, slowly walking us down in the desert. And that if we hadn't reached that truck stop when we did, it would have caught up. I live right on the edge of the Mojave Desert. Summer's hit 115 plus, so I've gotten into the habit of taking long walks out there at night, usually by moonlight, in those early morning hours when everything is quiet. I know it's not the smartest thing, especially being miles from town, but there's something about it. Being alone out there feels primal. Like you're more aware, more alive. A few weeks ago, I was about 6 miles out, just walking like usual, when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It started as this high-pitched screech, almost like a whine, but it kept rising, getting sharper, louder, more intense. It didn't sound like anything human, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew either. And it was close. Maybe 10, 15 yards away. I fumbled for my phone, hands suddenly not so steady, and managed to turn on the flashlight. I swept the beam across the brush and caught just a glimpse of something. A leg. Moving fast. Slipping into the sagebrush and vanishing. That was it. Just gone. It reminded me of that scene in Signs, where the light hits the cornfield just in time to see something disappear. Same feeling, like you almost saw it, but not enough to understand what it was. I still don't know. Maybe it was some person out there, but if it was, they would have had to be moving on all fours to disappear that quickly and that low. I can't think of any animal around here that makes a sound like that either. I didn't stick around to investigate. Whatever it was, I decided it could keep the desert that night. I'm honestly surprised microburst isn't higher on the list. Picture this, a sudden wall of rain paired with 60 to 80 miles per hour winds. Sounds intense, but the real danger comes from the ground. Rain here doesn't soak in, it just runs off. So you get slammed with wind and rain hard enough that there's nothing to do but sit tight and ride it out. And then, almost immediately afterward, the runoff turns into a flash flood. It hits fast, hits hard, and leaves you wishing you'd never stepped outside. Desert enthusiast here. One night, my friends and I headed out for a 2-night camping trip. On the way, we got caught in heavy rain, so by the time we reached the desert, everything was cool and damp. We decided to take a walk in the dark, just enjoying the quiet. At one point, my friend paused and said he thought he could hear a snake. I brushed it off, telling him it was probably just the wind. Then he clicked on his flashlight, and right at his feet, coiled in a defensive posture, was a Palestinian viper. Its orange eyes glowed in the beam of light. Needless to say, we were incredibly lucky that no one accidentally stepped on the little snake. I was camping in southern Colorado at Great Sand Dunes National Park. From the campsites, you get a full view of the dunes. It's absolutely breathtaking. Around 10 p.m., I stepped out of my tent to head to the bathroom. It was summer, so the sky had only recently darkened. As I looked out over the dunes, I saw something I still can't explain. At first, it looked like the circle of light you get from an old flashlight held up to a wall, but this was massive, dim, and a strange shade of purple, like the light was coming from far, far away. The giant circle of light moved horizontally across the dunes in a slow, wavy motion, and then it vanished. I know it sounds bizarre. I've seen my share of strange things, but this one defies explanation. It wasn't a floating orb, it seemed flat, almost pressed against the dunes. If it was being projected from somewhere, I couldn't see the source, and I can't imagine how a single light could cover a quarter of the dunes like that. Maybe not the most dramatic answer, but the scariest thing for me was the sheer vastness, the endless, empty nothingness stretching on for days. Being out there made me feel like an alien, stranded on some other planet, completely alone. I used to live near a small town by Red Rocks, Nevada. One night, around 9:30 p.m., I was walking into town when I noticed a tall figure, maybe 6 feet, standing about 50 feet away. They were dressed completely in black, carrying something black and shiny in one arm and a shovel in the other. I called my mom, and she told me it would be safer to crash at a friend's place for the night. I went out to a desert park at 3 a.m., hoping to escape the city lights and catch a meteor shower. I found darkness instead. I stepped out of my car and couldn't see a thing. I was scanning the sky for shooting stars when I heard it, clop, clop, clop. The sound grew louder and faster, clop, 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 clop. Panicked, I jumped back in the car and turned on the headlights. Then came a terrifying sound, like a scream. Wild horses. I was surrounded. They were everywhere. I didn't even realize I was afraid of horses, but invisible horses in the middle of the desert at 3 a.m.? That freaked me the hell out. Iraqi here. Like many parts of the Middle East, we have what are called camel spiders. One day, I stepped out of my uncle's car on the highway to stretch my legs, and before I even realized it, I felt what I can only describe as the devil crawling up my leg. If you're curious, and maybe want to be terrified, look up camel spider and see what I mean. One night, while driving home, I stopped at an intersection and noticed something odd. There was a yellow light hovering above the streetlights on the corner, identical in color and shape, but clearly not attached to anything. As I stared, trying to figure out what I was seeing, it suddenly vanished, shooting off into the distance like it had never been there. Could have been nothing. Could have been something, aliens, a strange atmospheric phenomenon, or just a trick of my eyes. All I know is that it was weird, and now I have a UFO story to tell. My reaction? A quiet, huh? That's a mystery that'll haunt me forever. Then I shrugged, turned, and drove home. Back around 2010, I was living in the middle of nowhere in the northern outback of Australia, in a tiny town called Halls Creek. It's roughly halfway between Broome and Darwin, hundreds of kilometers from either, and mostly just a hotel catering to travelers making the long journey between the two cities. I was working at that hotel alongside a handful of backpackers and vagabonds. On our days off, we'd go on little adventures, a drive out to a swimming hole, a hike through the desert, a campfire on a hilltop, just enjoying the vast, empty wilderness. One day, a few of us were driving along a lonely desert road when we came across something that made us stop cold, a large pile of dead cows. About a dozen of them, just 20 meters off the side of the road, bloated and lifeless. There was no sign of what had killed them or how they ended up there. It was completely inexplicable. Not in the desert this time, but in the city. I got off my bus after work and found myself just a few feet away from a terrified coyote, right next to a busy intersection. My first thought was to grab it and keep it out of traffic, but thankfully, I didn't. It was rush hour on a Friday. That coyote darted diagonally across 8 lanes of traffic and somehow didn't get hit. I just watched it go, silently wishing it well, hoping it found something tasty out in the desert. Another time, I drove past a stopped car near my house at night. Someone had hit a javelina going around 40 miles per hour. It was a sad scene, and I can only imagine how badly something like that could wreck your car. Honestly, it might not sound like much, but one time I stopped to take in a view while out on my dirt bike and completely got turned around. I couldn't find my trail back for 30 to 45 minutes and was terrified to leave the ridge I was on, worried I'd go the wrong way. No water, no one around to hear me if I yelled for help. I ended up riding in circles until, finally, I spotted my own tracks leading back. Definitely a scary moment, but a huge learning experience. My friend and I were out near Palm Springs for a sunrise photo shoot, up ridiculously early and wandering through the desert. I was posing among all sorts of vegetation, not really thinking about what might be lurking nearby. On our way out, we came across a massive rattlesnake right on the road, coiled, staring at us like it meant business. I've run into rattlesnakes while hiking in national parks before and just skirted around them, but this one was on another level entirely. My friend managed to snap an insanely intense shot of him, so menacing it could have easily appeared in National Geographic. I really wish I still had a copy to share. I like to think of frozen lakes as deserts in their own way. One winter day in mid-January in Quebec, I was out in the middle of a huge lake, walking my dog. The lake is massive. Crossing it would take about 2 hours, but I usually stayed near the center. It was clear and sunny, but very windy. At one point, I noticed a large air pocket forming beneath the ice, but not in the usual way. Normally, these pockets burst like mini ice volcanoes, but this one was a tall cylinder slowly rising through the ice. These formations move incredibly slowly, over days, and are typically about 2 feet thick. My dog was happily running across it, oblivious to the danger. I gently pushed her off the top just as I heard a deep, echoing crack that vibrated across the ice. My heart raced. Here I was, in the middle of a frozen lake, freezing cold, far from shore. Then the ice gave way beneath me. Miraculously, I landed on a shallow sandbar, soaking my boots in less than a foot of water, and laughed maniacally as I crawled out of the mini dome created by the air pocket. Now, every summer, I try to find that shallow spot with my kayak just to reminisce about that wild moment. I live in a semi-desert area. It's hard to describe, really. Out in nature there, it's usually eerily quiet. There's so little around to make any sound. So the scariest thing isn't seeing something. It's hearing something moving nearby, even though there's nowhere it could possibly be hiding. Desert resident here. Windy boys and skinny boys are real. On my way home from work, my office is right in the middle of a reservation. I drove past a coyote standing upright on its hind legs. I'll never forget it. I'm not writing the full names out because a Navajo friend told me not to, and honestly, I'm not about to be the kind of clueless outsider who thinks they know better. I'm not superstitious, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't right. This happened when I was really young, back in Namibia. I was walking ahead of the group, completely distracted, and decided to let the person in front of me go on ahead. Good thing I did, because we came face to face with a puff adder, one of the very venomous snakes found in southern Africa. A short distance later, maybe 350 meters from the first one, we stumbled across another snake. And to top it off, about 400 meters beyond that, there was another puff adder. That day, my fear of snakes was in overdrive, but thinking back, it was a hot day, so maybe that's why they were all out. Another time, I was driving with my dad along the desert roads and spotted an old car that had clearly crashed into some trees years before. And on a camping trip, when we cut open a watermelon at our site, hordes of bees swarmed us. We ended up having to pack everything up and move to a different campsite. Lesson learned. My husband and I were walking our dog around the block when suddenly all three of us froze. The hair on our necks stood on end. At the corner, there was this huge black humanoid. Maybe a shape, maybe a shadow. It's hard to describe. Even our usually quiet dog started growling viciously, the kind of growl I've never heard before. The shadow thing just stood there for a minute, staring at us, and then slowly ambled down the road. We didn't run, didn't want to provoke it, but we hurried straight home as fast as we could. Hands down, the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Edit. Another time in the same area, I saw more shadows. These ones looked like giant black garbage bags with legs, almost like a Fresno night walker type, but all the limbs were somehow contained inside the bag-like body. As they walked, the limbs stretched and shifted inside, and it was incredibly disconcerting. I went straight inside and locked the door. The scariest thing I've ever experienced was definitely the 7.3 Landers earthquake back in 1992. We were only about 2 miles from the epicenter. The experience itself was terrifying, but seeing the road split apart so badly that we couldn't even drive over it and had to turn back was surreal. We were in a tiny one-room cabin when it hit. The shaking was so violent we couldn't even stand, and the sound, it was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My friend's dad was yelling at us to take cover, only 15 feet away, and we couldn't hear a word. When it finally stopped, the front door was stuck. A neighbor had to come help us get it open. Stepping outside, the valley was eerily silent, with a dust cloud hovering over the boulder-strewn mountains in the distance. We packed up and left immediately, heading home, 3 hours away. Somewhere between Palm Springs and the backside of Big Bear, we stopped to take in a view of the mountains. Then a big aftershock hit. Within seconds, the entire mountain was swallowed by a massive dust cloud as boulders dislodged and tumbled down. We finally got home, but I had nightmares for months. I would wake up screaming. I was only 15 at the time. Even now, decades later, I still have PTSD from it. Anytime I even feel the ground move, no matter how small, it triggers a panic attack and brings me to tears.